When JJ told me about tonight's theme at the Lancaster Story Slam last month, she said that she picked the theme for her grandfather. And her grandfather and my father are about the same age. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't think of a story that didn't have anything to do with my dad. So if you'll bear with me tonight, if you'll forgive me, I want to tell a couple of quick stories about my dad. He grew up in a little coal town up in northern Pennsylvania during the Depression. He served in World War II. He actually has honorable discharges from the Army Air Corps, and the Navy. And he said he settled on the Navy because they paid $5 a month more than the other services. He was an aircraft mechanic, and he could take apart and put together just about anything. When I was in my 40s, I finally did the math and realized that I was a whoops baby. I have two older sisters that are a year apart, and then an older brother who's 2 years younger than them, and then there's 11 years in me, and then there's 7 years in a younger brother. And I think that had something to do with my relationship with my father. It's not like I never felt unloved. He and I had a relationship, but we never really clicked. And I think it was a generational thing. And as I got older, I thought I was leading a pretty interesting life, but my father was always there to put things into perspective for me. When I got out of college, we were talking, I said, Dad, there were some tough months there. When I was in school, once a month I'd go and I'd buy a 50-pound bag of rice, and then once a week I'd buy a hoagie and cut it into slices, and every day I would have a piece of hoagie and a bowl of rice, and for months that's all I had to eat. And my dad said, yeah, things can get tough. When I was a kid in the Depression, we'd run out of coal in the winter, and up in the mountains it gets pretty cold, so we wouldn't be able to afford coal to heat the house. So my buddies and I would go coal picking in a culvert that ran through the town. The coal company would throw off pieces of coal that had too much slate on them, and we'd find them and break off the slate and bring them home to heat the house. I said, Dad, I don't remember that culvert. He said, oh, they paved that over when they brought sewers in. That's the old town sewer. And I went, okay, Dad, you win. When I got started in the video business, I was a freelancer. So as a freelancer, you're out of work at the end of every day, and you're only as good as your last job. And I really wanted to make a good impression and build a career in the business. And one of my early jobs, I got called to work for the RCA Corporation over in Camden, New Jersey. And part of the job was picking up some equipment in Philadelphia and taking it to Camden in my 1971 Dodge Dart. And on the way, during this downpour, I ran through a puddle and the car stopped. So I get out and I dry out the distributor cap and put it back on. I get the car started and it goes for a while and it stops. And I dry out the distributor cap and drive for a while and it stops. And this goes on and on. And this is before cell phones, so I can't call and say, hey, I'm gonna be late. I just keep going. And eventually I get to across the highway from the RCA corporate headquarters, and the car just dies. It's not gonna go anymore. So I pick up all these cases that I have, and I walk across 6 lanes of traffic that sounded just like that, across this long lawn in front of the RCA headquarters and into the lobby of the headquarters building, soaked to my skin, dripping puddles of water off me, and 4 hours late. Fortunately, the guy I was working with said, if you had quit, if you had just not shown up, if you said you weren't coming, I'd never hire you again, but you stuck with it. Come back tomorrow. And my dad said, you got off better than I did. I met a girl and asked her out on a date on a Saturday night. She lived a couple of towns over. So I got my Model T Ford, they call them Tin Lizzies, And I drove up over the mountain to go pick her up, and I get to the top of the mountain and the car stalls. So I push it off the side of the road and I start taking the engine apart to try and figure out what's wrong with this thing. And I've got most of the engine apart on the side of the road, and it starts raining cats and dogs. Harder than I've ever seen it rain. And all of a sudden, ba-boom, lightning strikes the tree I'm under, and flaming branches are falling on top of the car, on top of me. I'm brushing off the branches that are on the rag top, and I'm stamping out branches, and I get the engine back together again, and I get down to the girl's house, and her mom answers the door and takes one look at me and says that there is no way she is letting her daughter go out with this guy. And I look at myself, and I am soaked to the skin, grease from hand to elbow, and I've got a bald patch where my hair caught fire. Now, I had gone through all of this, so I was not going to let this girl off easy, so I persevered until her father came to the door, took one look at me, laughed, slammed the door, and I never saw that girl again. I said, okay, Dad, you win. One day I was walking across my kitchen floor, walking across my kitchen, and it was like I got shot in the belly. It was the worst pain I have ever felt. It was a sharp stabbing pain in my gut, and it literally knocked my legs out from under me, and I went down onto the floor, and I'm laying on the floor of my kitchen in agony. And I crawl over to the table and grab my car keys, and I make it out to the car, and I manage to drive maybe a half a mile to the hospital. Fortunately, it wasn't far, and I pull up in front of the ER, and you know, I don't even think I took the car out of gear. I just opened the door and fell out of the car and crawled over to the curb where there was a wheelchair. And I couldn't get into the wheelchair, so I pulled myself up onto the seat and walked into the ER on my knees, past a couple of doctors who were looking at me like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. And they let me in, kidney stones. And my dad said, oh, you're right, kidney stones are painful. That's the worst pain ever. Oh, that was terrible. I had those in Okinawa during the war. The doctor said they couldn't do anything for me because the battle was going on and they were patching up the guys. And they gave me a 50-gallon drum of water and said, go drink it until you pass the stone. So I'm laying on a cot in a tent on the beach in Okinawa, and artillery is firing over my head, and bombs are falling all around me, and I'm drinking this 50-gallon drum of water saying, come on, Stone, come on, Stone. I said, okay, Dad, you win. That was just his way. He wasn't being competitive, and what I figured out was I was the one being competitive. And I also figured out that there was some place that my competitiveness and my perseverance and my ability to put things together, it came from somewhere. And all these characteristics that allowed me to be a success in my business all came from somewhere. There's a story I tell about flying into Baton Rouge, Louisiana in a tropical storm. That goes on for 15 minutes, so I won't tell it now. But I've told it at Lancaster and a few other places. And I told my dad, and I said, Dad, I was scared. It was like I was inside God's own toy airplane, and he was shaking it around and banging it on things, and I thought that was it. And my dad said, yeah, I had to land a plane in a tropical storm once. I was working on this Piper Cub and back in '44, and back then those were like paper kites with lawnmower engines on them. So I took one up to ring it out, and I'm coming down for a landing, and a tropical storm had just blown in with 60-mile-an-hour gusts and 40-mile-an-hour crosswinds. And they waved me off the main runway to this landing strip because they didn't want me messing up their runway when I augured in. So I'm approaching on this landing strip, and the landing strip is here, but my plane is pointed here because I've got a 40-mile-an-hour crosswind, and I have to time it just as I touch down, I'm right on the landing strip. And as I'm approaching, I'm focused on this, and then I look out the side window and I realize that the hangars are going in the wrong direction. I'm flying backwards. I landed the plane on the landing strip, nose down, tail up, the exact opposite of how you land a plane, flying backwards, so that the tail hook wouldn't catch and flip me over. He said, it wasn't pretty, but you know, they say any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. Another thing they say is that we all die 2 times. When our body goes, and when people stop telling stories about us. So now if you go to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, the one at BWI that has the big planes and the big rockets, there's a monument to aviation. And there are hundreds and hundreds of names on that, and one of those names is George W. Smith, aviation machinist mate 2nd class, U.S. Navy, World War II. And now, in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, is the story of my father landing his Piper J2 Cub backwards in a tropical storm on a landing strip in South Carolina in 1944. Thank you very much for